Okay, Roger, as you know more than anybody, there's a phenomenal amount of noise out there with personality assessments. And I suppose what would be your thinking in terms of how will the Pearman break through that noise, be heard? What difference would it make?
I believe that if you were to line up all of the major personality tools, all of them,
Hmm.
you would find that there's a linearity to the way in which they present data. The idea being you could be low, middle, or high in the way your personality gets expressed.
Okay.
The pyramid begins with the proposition that it's not so much about low, medium, and high as much as it is accessing resources that you could choose to use in a more deliberate way. So, whereas all the other personality tools, all of them want to tell you you are low on this, and therefore that could be an issue depending on your circumstance, or high on this, that could be overplayed depending on your circumstance. The Pearman takes a very nuanced approach that says it's really about how you're using psychological energy and how that energy is being used to enable you to respond to everyday demands and challenges is where the story is. So while other personality models are very intent on describing you as very much as a kind of this is the what of you, the pyramid is very process oriented. Rather than a what, it's much more, here are some of the processes you're using in relative degrees, and you could learn to use these depending on the demands you have in a more productive, useful way. Another component of the pyramid, which I think makes it very, very different, is the idea that flexibility is central to adaptation and development. And so within the pyramid, flexibility can play out between such things as the way in which you use psychological resources. If you're more of an extroverted thinker, do you flex when you need to extrovert intuition, to explore ideas and possibilities? That's one kind of flexibility. There's a flexibility that exists between what I feel is really comfortable to do and what I feel I have to do every day. For some people, that difference is a real source of strain, and that strain sucks away psychological energy that they could have for other things. Or, depending on your flexibility, it could be a source that sparks your creativity and your a kind of tension that produces energy for you. A third, very subtle, nuanced form of flexibility within the pyramid, which is radically different than any other tool, is the idea that there is a very basic use of a psychological resource and a very complex use. And do you have enough development of that resource to flex when you need to be simple, when you need to complexly use that material? Now, that's all very abstract sounding, but let's take an example.
Okay, great.
A very basic form of thinking is to identify what's wrong with a situation. Almost all folks with a thinking preference will tell you instantaneously they can listen to a circumstance and say, well, here are the three things that are wrong with this. A much more complex form of thinking is one that says there's a system at work here. We need to understand the multivariate dynamics in this system before we can make too many declarations about what is or isn't right. A complex form of thinking is very attuned to the complexities of a situation, the dynamic cause and effect that can occur in multiple variables. It's astonishing the number of people who really have not developed their thinking to a more complex level. Feeling, as an example, is another in the Jungian sense. Feeling, where a very simple form of that is, I don't like this. This doesn't feel right to me. This this isn't really comfortable for me. A more complex form of feeling is there are a set of interactive dynamics and ideals in this circumstance. I need to uncover those to understand them more fully. I need to understand what the ideals are in this setting before I move to close a conclusion on this circumstance. So there are some people who've yet to develop that rich feeling function. And so as a result, we have this very simple form to very complex form. So the Pearman invites you to look at that richness. You won't find that in any other personality tool. Another difference that I think is really profound, and it has to do with the practitioner's side of this. Okay. Years ago, when everything was pencil, paper, and folks were, coloring in on circles on an answer sheet, you had the answer sheet. You got the score and the report, but you also had the answer sheet. And if you had to follow up on omissions, you could find out what it is people omitted. If you needed to figure out a pattern of responses, you could go look up those items and figure out the pattern. As a coach and a facilitator, that was gold. With the Pearman, you get a whole coach report that enables you to take a look at the whole story. How did the person respond to every single question? What were the response patterns like? How did those response patterns feed into the results? And as a coach, you have no mystery, which enables you to answer questions of the individual you're working with in a much more complete way. The last piece that I would highlight is if you look at the descriptions of almost all other personality tools, they're quite predictable on the low, middle, and high end. With the Pearman, the paragraph descriptions are highly nuanced, depending on the range and the nature of responses that a person gave in each of the sections. So that you could be sitting next to a person, let's say, who also had a higher vote for extroverted thinking. But when you start looking at the descriptions could be significantly different because of the way in which I'm using extroverted thinking versus the way in which you use extroverted thinking. That kind of richness you won't find in any other tool.
A much richer conversation. Wonderful.